Imagine this. You haven't had a roof over your head in months. Every night is a gamble against the cold, the rain, the unseen dangers lurking in the shadows. Your world is concrete, cardboard, and the gnawing ache of hunger. Your body is a map of aches and pains, a testament to countless nights spent on unforgiving ground. Then, one freezing rain-lashed night, seeking just a moment's shelter from a sudden brutal downpour, you push open what you think is the warped, peeling door of an old, abandoned shed, and step, not into the expected musty darkness, but into a place that defies everything you know, everything you've endured. A place of impossible warmth, of soft ambient light filtering from unseen sources, and a silence so profound, so utterly devoid of the city's constant roar, that it feels louder than any street noise you've ever heard. The air itself feels different, clean still, carrying faint, unfamiliar scents. You've stumbled, not into a derelict shed, but into a mansion. Not just any mansion, but one that feels suspended in time, perfectly preserved yet eerily empty. The door swings shut behind you with a soft click, sealing you inside. What do? Do you immediately succumb to the terror and the instinct to run, to scramble back out into the familiar, brutal rain? Or does something inside you, a desperate flicker of hope, ignited by the sheer impossibility of this moment, or maybe just sheer, stunned disbelief, make you take one hesitant step further inside, into the heart of this unexpected, silent sanctuary? His name was Arthur, or at least, that was the name he still clung to. A fragile anchor to a life that felt increasingly like a fading dream. A story about someone else, entirely. Tonight, Arthur wasn't dwelling on names or the ghosts of past lives. His world had shrunk to the immediate, the primal, the biting cold, the relentless, soaking rain, the desperate need for shelter. It had started as a hesitant drizzle, a gentle, almost mocking tease, but had quickly escalated into a furious horizontal assault, driven by a brutal, bone-chilling wind that seemed to seek him out, to strip away the last vestiges of his warmth and resolve. His usual spot, a meager refuge tucked away under the belly of a concrete overpass, was already a shallow, muddy lake. He was soaked through, his thin, threadbare blanket clinging to him like a sodden skin, offering zero protection, only added weight and misery. He stumbled blindly through the affluent neighborhood, a place he usually avoided like the plague. Too many pristine lawns, too many motion sensor lights, too many watchful eyes peering from behind expensive curtains, too many layers of security systems designed to keep people like him firmly on the outside. But desperation, a cold, gnawing hunger that went beyond the stomach to the very core of his being, was a powerful, overriding motivator. He saw a high, imposing stone wall, its surface a tapestry of dark, dripping ivy, and behind it, the darker, more imposing outline of a large structure, its roofline barely visible against the stormy sky. There was a main gate, grand and ornate, but it was clearly imposing, locked tight with heavy iron chains, an impenetrable barrier. Further down the wall, though, almost hidden by a tangle of overgrown, rain-soaked bushes, he noticed a smaller, less ornate door. It looked unassuming, perhaps a service entrance, leading to a garden shed, a utility room, or maybe just a forgotten corner of the property. Anything, absolutely anything, was better than the relentless, soul-draining rain. With numb, clumsy fingers, he fumbled for the handle. It was old, cold metal, slick with rain. He expected it to be locked, rusted shut, another dead end in a life full of them. To his astonishment, to his utter disbelief, it turned. Slowly, cautiously, as if afraid of what he might find, or perhaps afraid of breaking the spell, he pushed the door inward, bracing himself for the expected smells of damp earth, mildew, or forgotten tools. But that wasn't the smell that hit him. It was the faint, clean scent of old wood polish, a delicate, almost ghostly hint of lavender, and something else, something warm and utterly still, like air that had been perfectly preserved, undisturbed for years, perhaps decades. It was the smell of a place that was cared for, lived in, yet held its breath. He stepped inside, pulling the heavy door shut behind him, with a soft, echoing thud that seemed to reverberate through the silent space, plunging the small entryway into near complete darkness. Save for a thin, ethereal sliver of moonlight filtering through a high, dust-streaked window, illuminating dancing motes of dust in the air. He was standing in what felt undeniably like a wide hallway, but not the narrow utilitarian passage of a shed. It was spacious, with a sense of height and volume that spoke of something far grander. He fumbled in his pocket for the cheap, disposable lighter he kept for emergencies, its weak, sputtering flame flickering reluctantly to life, casting wild, dancing shadows on the walls. The sight that greeted him stole his breath, held it captive in his chest. Not a shed, not a utility room. He was undeniably in a grand entrance hall, polished marble floors, inlaid with a subtle, elegant pattern, stretched out before him, reflecting the tiny, fragile flame of his lighter, like a dark, still pool. A sweeping, curved staircase, its banister a dark, gleaming wood, curved gracefully upwards into the oppressive gloom of the upper floors, disappearing into shadow. There were paintings on the walls, large and imposing, their subjects hidden in the deep shadows, their frames catching the meager light. The air was cool, but blessedly dry, a stark, almost shocking contrast to the freezing, soaking wetness outside. Confusion, sharp and disorienting, warred with a primal, instinctual urge to flee, to scramble back out into the rain, into the known misery, rather than this unknown, impossible reality. How? How was this door unlocked? Why was this place empty? Was someone here, watching him from the shadows? His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, desperate drumbeat in the overwhelming, unnatural silence. Every fiber of his being, every hard-won lesson from the streets, screamed danger, trespass, the terrifying certainty of getting caught and facing the consequences. But another part, a small, weary, almost forgotten voice deep within him, whispered seductively about the warmth, the absolute dryness, the promise of a temporary, impossible reprieve from the brutal elements. He stood frozen, a statue carved from disbelief and fear, listening intently. Only the ragged sound of his own breathing, loud and alien in the stillness, and the faint, distant drumming of rain on the roof met his ears. Silence. Complete, utter silence. It felt heavier than the air itself, pressing in on him, amplifying the sound of his own heartbeat. He took another hesitant step, the lighter held aloft like a fragile beacon, his eyes darting around the vast space, scanning every shadow, every corner. No sounds, no movement. It felt empty, not just unoccupied, but profoundly, disturbingly abandoned. Yet, there were no dust sheets draped over the furniture he could just glimpse in the periphery through doorways. No obvious signs of decay or long-term neglect, beyond a thin, almost imperceptible layer of dust on the gleaming marble. It was as if the occupants had simply vanished. Mid-sentence, mid-life. A shiver, not from the cold this time, but from a deep, unsettling sense of unease, traced its way down his spine. This place felt wrong, profoundly, eerily still. But the rain outside was still a relentless, unforgiving sheet, a cold, wet curtain, separating him from this impossible sanctuary. And the thought of returning to its misery was, in that moment, utterly unbearable. Just a few minutes, he told himself, his internal voice a desperate plea. Just long enough to get completely out of the rain, to let his clothes stop their heavy, miserable dripping, to feel the warmth return to his numb limbs. He moved further into the hall, drawn by an unseen force, a morbid curiosity mixing with his desperate physical need for shelter. Where did that grand staircase lead? What secrets lay behind those closed, imposing doors lining the hall? And the biggest, most perplexing question of all, who did this place belong to? And why, in God's name, was it left like this, unlocked and seemingly forgotten? A perfect, silent monument to a life abruptly interrupted. The mystery was a hook, pulling him deeper into the house, away from the safety of the door. His lighter, its fluid depleted, flickered one last time and died, plunging him back into near-total darkness. He fumbled for it, his hands shaking slightly, a fresh wave of anxiety washing over him. He needed light. He needed to see where he was, to understand this impossible, disorienting situation. He remembered seeing a faint, warm glow emanating from what looked like a lamp in a room off the main hall, just as his lighter's flame had sputtered out. It was a fragile thread of light in the overwhelming darkness, and he clung to the memory. He edged towards the opening, his bare feet silent and cold on the marble floor, each step tentative, cautious. He reached the doorway and peered inside, his eyes slowly adjusting to the faint light. It was a living room, vast and opulent, a space designed for comfort and conversation, now holding only silence and shadows. Moonlight, having fought its way through the stormy clouds, streamed through tall, uncovered windows, illuminating the space with a ghostly, ethereal glow. Plush, velvet sofas, deep and inviting, were arranged around a large polished mahogany coffee table. A grand piano, its dark wood gleaming faintly, sat silently in one corner, a silent testament to music that was no longer played. It was like stepping into a museum exhibit of extreme wealth and a life abruptly put on hold. And there, on a side table next to an empty teacup, its porcelain gleaming faintly in the moonlight, sat a lamp. Not a modern electric lamp, but an old-fashioned oil lamp, its glass chimney catching the faint light. And beside it, a small, promising box of matches. His hands trembled with a mixture of cold and anticipation as he reached for them. Striking a match, the small, fragile flame sputtered to life, casting dancing, distorted shadows on the walls, making the unseen corners of the room seem to shift and writhe. He carefully, his hands steadier now with purpose, lit the wick of the oil lamp. A soft, warm, steady light bloomed in the corner of the room, pushing back the oppressive, fearful darkness, creating a small, safe island in the vast, silent space. He sank onto the edge of one of the sofas, the velvet surprisingly soft and cool beneath his worn, damp trousers. He pulled the thin, still damp blanket tighter around his shoulders, the warmth emanating from the lamp, a small but significant comfort against the lingering chill. He looked around, taking in the details, the small personal touches that spoke of lives lived here. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with leather-bound volumes, their titles unreadable from this distance. A grand fireplace, cold and empty, dominated another wall, its mantelpiece adorned with framed photographs. He rose and moved towards the mantelpiece, drawn by the faces in the silver frames. He picked up one frame, the metal cool against his fingers. A woman with kind, smiling eyes, a man with a stern but undeniably gentle look, and two children, a boy and a girl, their faces alight with laughter. They looked happy. They looked vibrantly alive. Where were they now? Why would anyone leave all this behind? The questions gnawed at him, a growing ache of confusion and unease in his chest. He set the photo down gently, a strange, melancholic ache settling in his chest. This was someone's life. A life so far removed from his own harsh reality, it felt like something from a movie, from a world that couldn't possibly exist. He, Arthur, who scavenged for food from bins and slept in damp, cold doorways, was sitting in a room that probably cost more than he could ever imagine earning in multiple lifetimes of honest work, if he could even find it. He noticed a newspaper neatly folded on the coffee table. He picked it up, the paper crisp, not yellowed or brittle with age, as he might have expected in an abandoned house. His eyes fell on the date printed on the front page. The numbers seemed to leap out at him, making his blood run cold. It was from last week. This wasn't an abandoned house from decades ago, slowly succumbing to dust and decay. This house had been lived in recently, very recently. The implications of that fact crashed down on him, a sudden, terrifying wave. The occupants weren't gone forever. They could return at any moment. The silence wasn't the silence of long-term abandonment. It was the silence of absence. Temporary absence. His heart rate, which had just begun to slow, spiked again. A frantic bird trapped in his chest. He had to leave. Now. Immediately. Immediately? Before anyone came back, before he was discovered, before he was arrested, or worse. The warmth of the lamp, the comfort of the sofa, vanished, replaced by a cold, creeping fear. But as he started to rise, his eyes fell upon something else on the coffee table, partially obscured by the newspaper. A small leather-bound journal. It looked old, well used, its cover softened with time and handling. Something compelled him to reach for it, to pick it up. Maybe it was the dormant writer in him, the part of his identity that had died a little more each day on the streets, starved of nourishment and purpose. Maybe it was the desperate, illogical hope of finding an explanation for this impossible place, for the unsettling silence and the recent newspaper. He opened the journal, its pages smelling faintly of old paper, and something else, something indefinably sad. The handwriting was elegant, flowing, clearly that of a well-educated person. He read the first entry his eyes landed on, the lamplight casting a warm, intimate glow on the page, illuminating the words as if they were meant only for him. October 14th. The feeling is growing stronger. A palpable presence in the house, like a shadow lengthening and deepening over everything, suffocating the light. He sees it too. I know he does, though he refuses to speak of it, to acknowledge the growing dread that hangs in the air. The children are starting to ask questions, innocent questions about the strange noises they hear at night. What feeling? What shadow? Who was he? The entry was cryptic, unsettling, raising far more questions than it answered, pulling him deeper into the unsettling mystery of this house and the lives lived within its walls. He flipped to another page, further back in the journal, seeking context, a beginning to this disturbing narrative. September 1st. We moved in today. The house is everything we dreamed of and more. A fresh start. A place to build our future, a sanctuary away from the noise and pressures of the city. The children love the garden, the vastness of the rooms. I feel a sense of peace here, a profound tranquility I haven't felt in years. It feels like a fresh start. Peace? The contrast between the joyful, hopeful entry from September and the fearful, apprehensive one from October was stark and deeply unsettling. What had happened in the space of just over a month to transform this dream home into a place of growing dread? This wasn't just a story of wealth and privilege. It was a story of something going terribly, profoundly wrong. He felt a growing sense of unease, a prickling sensation on the back of his neck. This house wasn't just a shelter from the rain. It held secrets. Dark secrets, perhaps. Secrets that had driven a family away. Should he keep reading? Should he delve deeper into the intimate fears and experiences of the people who had lived here, risking discovery with every passing minute he lingered? Or should he put the journal down, extinguish the lamp, and disappear back into the rain and the harsh, predictable life he knew. He hesitated, the journal heavy in his hands, its pages holding the weight of another's fear. The rain still drummed relentlessly outside, a constant drumming reminder of the harsh reality waiting for him. The cold, wet misery he had escaped, however temporarily. Inside, the soft glow of the lamp offered warmth and light, a fragile bubble of comfort, and the journal offered a distraction, a puzzle that was beginning to consume his thoughts, a narrative more compelling and terrifying than anything he had encountered on the streets. He decided just for a few more minutes he would stay. He would read. He had nothing to lose, did he? His life on the streets offered no comfort, no safety, no answers. Maybe, just maybe, this strange empty mansion held something, anything, that could make sense of this impossible night, of his own desperate existence. He turned more pages, reading snippets, trying to piece together the story. Entries about strange drafts in rooms with no windows, about doors found ajar after being closed, about the children whispering to invisible friends. Eleanor's fear was palpable in her elegant script. She wrote about her husband, James, becoming withdrawn, spending hours in his study, researching something he wouldn't discuss. She suspected he knew more than he was letting on, that he was trying to protect her and the children from a truth he found too terrifying to voice. One entry described a specific incident. The little girl, Lily, waking up screaming, pointing to the corner of her room and saying, "The shadow man is watching me." Eleanor's attempts to comfort her, her husband's dismissive rationalizations, the growing chasm between them. The house, which was meant to be their sanctuary, was slowly becoming their prison, trapping them with an unseen threat. Arthur felt a knot of tension tighten in his stomach. He was a trespasser, reading the private fears of a family he didn't know, a family who had been driven from their home by something they couldn't explain. He was a ghost in a house haunted by other, perhaps more literal, ghosts. He read about Eleanor's growing desperation, her attempts to find help, to talk to someone who would believe her. Her friends thought she was stressed, overwhelmed by the move and the size of the house. Her doctor suggested anxiety medication. No one believed her about the shadow, the feeling, the man in the walls. She was alone in her fear. The journal became a chronicle of a family's descent into terror, their growing isolation, their frantic attempts to understand and combat an enemy they couldn't see or touch. Eleanor wrote about researching the history of the house, looking for any past tragedies, any previous occupants who might shed light on their situation. She found nothing in the public records, only a history of wealthy, unremarkable families. But she had a nagging feeling, a growing certainty, that the house itself held the answers, that its stones and timbers held memories, perhaps even a malevolent consciousness. He reached the last entry again, the one he had read initially. October 20th. He says we have to leave. Now, don't ask questions. Just pack what is essential. The children are scared. I don't know where we're going. I don't know if we'll ever come back. It's here. It knows we know. The finality of it was chilling. They had left in a panic, abandoning their beautiful home, their possessions, their life, because of it. Because it knew they knew. Knew what? What terrible truth had James uncovered in his study? What had they seen or heard that had finally broken their resolve to stay? The journal offered no answers, only a terrifying conclusion. October 20th. That was just 4 days ago. The house was still holding its breath, the air still carrying the faint scent of lavender and stillness. They had left in a hurry, taking only essentials. What was it? What did it know? And where, in the dead of night, had they gone? The journal ended there. A story cut short, a life interrupted, a terrifying cliffhanger in a real-life drama. Arthur closed the journal, his mind a whirlwind of fear, confusion, and a strange, unwelcome empathy for the family who had lived here. This wasn't just a story of a rich family's misfortune. It was a story of a family terrified, driven from their home by something unseen. Something that knew they knew. The silence of the house no longer felt merely empty or still. It felt heavy with unspoken fear, with the lingering presence of whatever malevolent force had driven them out. It felt like a trap. He stood up, the need to leave now an overwhelming, visceral urge that eclipsed any lingering curiosity. This place wasn't safe. It wasn't just a house. It was a place haunted by a recent, terrifying event. A place where the past wasn't dead, but merely waiting. He moved back towards the entrance hall, the lamp held low, casting long dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist in his peripheral vision, mimicking the shadow figure in Lily's drawing. Every creak of the old house settling, every distant drip of rain outside, sounded like a footstep, a whisper, a movement in the shadows. His imagination, fueled by the journal entries, the unsettling silence, and his own deep-seated fear, was running wild, painting monsters in every corner. As he reached the main hall, the vast, dark space seemed to loom over him, more imposing, more menacing than before. He was halfway to the service door, his escape route, when a sudden, sharp noise from upstairs made him freeze, his heart seizing in his chest. A distinct, unmistakable thump. It wasn't the house settling. It wasn't the wind. It was a solid, heavy sound, like something falling or being moved deliberately. His heart leaped into his throat, a frantic bird desperate to escape. He wasn't alone. He extinguished the lamp instantly, the small flame vanishing, plunging the hall back into oppressive darkness. He pressed himself against the cold marble wall, trying to become one with the shadows, listening intently, straining his ears. Silence. Had he imagined it? A trick of the light? A sound from outside amplified by the house's acoustics? The wind. The old house settling. He desperately wanted to believe it was just the house, just the storm. He waited, counting the frantic beats of his own heart. 1 second, 2, 3. Nothing. Just the pounding of his own blood in his ears, the sound of his own ragged breathing. He had to get out. He fumbled in the darkness, trying to orient himself towards the service door he had entered through, his only way out. He took a step, then another, moving slowly, silently, his hands outstretched to avoid bumping into anything, to avoid making any noise that might betray his presence. Another sound. Closer this time. A soft, deliberate creak from the top of the grand staircase, the wood groaning under weight. Someone or something was definitely upstairs, and they were moving. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him, overriding all other thoughts. He couldn't be caught here. Not now. Not after everything he had seen, everything he had read. Not after glimpsing the terrifying secret that had driven a family away. He had to hide. He darted back towards the living room, his bare feet making no sound on the marble floor, his movements guided by instinct and fear. He slipped inside the doorway, pressing himself behind the heavy velvet curtains that covered one of the tall windows, the fabric thick and dusty against his face. He held his breath, straining to hear, over the frantic pounding of his heart. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, descending the main staircase. Creak. 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 They weren't heavy, like a man's purposeful tread. Lighter, dear. More hesitant. Maybe the woman. Eleanor? Had they come back? Or was it something else? The chilling possibility sent another wave of fear through him. He peeked through a narrow gap in the heavy curtains, his eyes fixed on the entrance hall visible from the living room doorway. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs and paused. The silence that followed was agonizingly long, stretched taut with anticipation and fear. Arthur's muscles tensed, ready to bolt, to burst from his hiding place, and make a desperate dash for the service door, if he had to. Then, a sound that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up, a sound that was utterly out of place, utterly terrifying in its innocence. A child's giggle, soft, airy, and utterly chilling in the oppressive, fearful silence of the house. It came from the hall, just outside the living room door. Arthur froze, every nerve ending, screaming danger. A child. The children from the photograph, from Eleanor's journal. But Eleanor's last entry said they were scared, leaving in a hurry. Why would they be giggling now? Why would they be here alone in the dark? He heard a small shuffling sound, like bare feet on the cold marble floor. The giggle came again, closer this time, just outside the doorway, a sound that was both innocent and deeply, profoundly wrong. He squeezed his eyes shut, pressing his forehead against the cool glass of the window behind the curtains. His heart pounding so hard, he thought it might burst through his chest, a frantic drum against his ribs. This wasn't right. Something was terribly, monstrously wrong. He heard the shuffling sound enter the living room. It was moving slowly, deliberately, through the vast space, exploring. He could hear soft, shallow breathing, close by, moving through the room. He stayed absolutely still behind the curtains, his body rigid with fear, every muscle screaming with the effort of remaining motionless. He could feel a presence in the room with him, moving slowly, exploring the space, getting closer. The shuffling stopped. It was close, very close. He could sense it near the sofa he had sat on earlier, near the coffee table. Then, a small voice, barely a whisper, broke the silence. A sound that was both heartbreaking and terrifying. "Hello?" It was a child's voice, a little girl's voice. It sounded lost, utterly, profoundly lost. Arthur's mind raced, a desperate scramble for an explanation. Was this one of the children from the photo? Had they been left behind in the panic? The thought was horrifying, a child abandoned in this terrifying place. But why was she alone? And why the strange, unsettling giggle earlier? He didn't dare move. He didn't dare speak. He was a homeless man, a trespasser, hiding in the dark from a lost child in a seemingly haunted mansion. It was a nightmare, a cruel twist of fate that had brought him from the misery of the streets to the terror of this place. He heard another soft sound, like something being placed gently on the coffee table. A light, almost imperceptible touch. Then the shuffling footsteps moved away, back towards the doorway, the soft breathing receding. He waited, straining his ears, listening until he heard the sounds fade into the distance, moving back towards the main hall, then presumably back upstairs, the soft creak of the stairs echoing faintly in the distance. Only when the silence returned, heavy and absolute once more, did Arthur dare to move, to unfreeze his rigid muscles. He slowly, cautiously, emerged from behind the curtains, his legs trembling so violently he could barely stand. He looked towards the coffee table, drawn by an irresistible, fearful curiosity. In the faint moonlight that still filtered through the tall windows, he could see it. Placed neatly next to where the journal had been was a small, crudely drawn picture. It was a house, a simple outline, with stick figures of a family standing outside, their hands held together. Above the house, drawn in thick, dark crayon, was a large, menacing shadow figure, its arms outstretched, reaching towards the family. And beneath the drawing, written in shaky, uneven, childlike letters, was a single chilling word: gone. Arthur stared at the drawing, a cold, profound dread washing over him, settling deep in his bones. The child wasn't lost. The child was still here. Or something pretending to be the child was. The family hadn't just left. They were gone. Driven out by the shadow, the thing that knew they knew. The drawing was a message, a confirmation of the terror Eleanor had described in her journal. He had to get out. Now. There was no more curiosity, no more thought of shelter, no more lingering warmth from the lamp. Just a desperate, overwhelming, primal need to escape this place, and whatever lingered within its silent, shadowed walls. He stumbled back towards the entrance hall, not caring about silence anymore, only speed, only escape. He reached the service door, his hands fumbling with the cold, slick handle in the dark, his fingers clumsy with fear. He pushed it open with a desperate shove and stumbled back out into the pouring, freezing rain, gasping for breath, the cold air burning in his lungs. The cold, the wet, the harsh, brutal reality of the street had never felt so welcoming, so safe. He pulled the heavy door shut behind him with a loud, echoing bang, leaning against the cold, rough stone wall, his body shaking, his heart still hammering against his ribs. A frantic, terrified bird. He was back outside, back in the life he knew, the life of concrete and cardboard and cold. But something had changed. He had glimpsed another world, a world of unimaginable wealth and terrifying secrets. He had touched the edges of a mystery he couldn't comprehend, a story that had ended abruptly, leaving only echoes, a chilling journal, and a child's unsettling drawing. He looked back at the dark, imposing mansion, its windows like vacant, staring eyes in the gloom, the rain running in dark streaks down its stone walls. He knew he should run, get as far away as possible, lose himself in the anonymity of the city streets. But as the rain plastered his thin clothes to his skin, as the cold seeped back into his bones, a single, unsettling thought lingered in his mind. A cold, persistent whisper. Was he sure he had left everything behind in that house? Or had something from within its silent, shadowed holes, something that knew, followed him back out into the rain, back into the world? Arthur never spoke of that night. Who would believe him? A homeless man claiming he stumbled into a haunted mansion where a wealthy family vanished, driven out by a shadow and a secret? He went back to his life, the endless, grinding cycle of survival, of seeking shelter and food, of blending into the background. But sometimes, on the coldest nights, when the wind howled like a mournful cry through the city streets, he would look up at the dark, distant hills, where the mansion stood, hidden amongst the trees, a silent, imposing shape against the night sky. And he would wonder about the family, about Eleanor and her journal, about James and the secret he uncovered, about the shadow and what it was, what it wanted. And he would wonder, most of all, about the child's giggle and the drawing left on the coffee table. Was she still there? Was it still there, waiting in the silent house? And could whatever had driven them out, whatever malevolent force lurked within those walls, ever find its way out? Could it follow? The questions had no answers, only a lingering, unsettling fear that sometimes, when the shadows were deep and the silence too profound, made him look over his shoulder.